All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight, we are excited to have Laird Barron here with us to talk about his new book, Worse Angels. Laird was born in Alaska, where he raised huskies and worked in the construction and fishing industries for much of his youth. He's the author of several short story collections and 3 novels, and his work has also appeared in many magazines and anthologies. A multiple Locus, World Fantasy, and Bram Stoker Award nominee, he is also a 3-time winner of the Shirley Jackson Award. He lives in Kensington, New York. Hi, Laird. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
Before I forget to mention, guys, if y'all are watching on Facebook, if you have any questions for Laird, just drop them in the comments below. I will be monitoring those, and we'll get to those after I am done chatting with him. So Laird, just real easy first question. Can you give us kind of your elevator pitch for this series?
Yeah, ex-enforcer, mafia enforcer with the Chicago outfit crosses the wrong guy and gets exiled from Alaska, and basically seeks to put his powers of darkness to work for good, and becomes a private investigator in New York State.
So, in some of your previous work, you've had recurring characters, but is this the first time you've actually done like a full main character for a series?
I would say so at this length. There's another character that is more than a recurring character that I had been working with prior to this, and her name is Jessica Mace. Mm-hmm. But that's about half a dozen stories featuring her at this point. So Coleridge is the first full, writing a novel and then another novel and another novel about the same, not only the same character but the same recurring cast of characters. So this has been an experience.
Yeah. So what are some of the challenges and also rewards of kind of writing a series character like that?
And I kind of meld this into just the idea of writing a series in general. I was kind of prepared for it just because most of the stories that I have written in the past, even though the characters aren't officially recurring and the stories aren't directly connected, like in a episode to episode fashion, they were all connected because there was sort of underlying plot going on. But that kind of got me ready for this. But I would say the biggest challenge that I have for the first 3 books is making it accessible for new readers, which I think becomes harder and harder as you go, because the series really isn't wholly episodic. There's a very defined overarching plot. And so there's a bit of a character study, a bit of a plot, and then there are these episodic adventures. And I would say the hardest part for me so far is balancing, not giving, not repeating myself from prior books, but also there has to be enough introductory exposition to ease that new person in so they're not 100%, floundering.
Yeah, it's really tough to do because you don't want it to be sort of the J.K. Rowling. Here, I'm going to explain to you what Quidditch is every book.
Right, and so there's this balance, because if you completely dismiss that, then you lose some readers, and if you overdo it, people, that annoys people. But now getting into the really, and so that's a challenge. It's not the end of the world. It's just something that you have to do. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the reward is something I touched on a moment ago. So I have the Jessica Mace character, and I love writing about her. Her half a dozen stories that she's featured in probably come to between 50 and 60,000 words. I have now written about Coleridge, somewhere over 250,000 words. And that's a really, you really do learn more and more about someone at a setting over the course of that many words. I find that it's easier and easier to write about him and his compatriots because I have prior experience. I kind of know how they're going to react, and yet I'm still learning enough that they surprise me.
I saw that you mentioned in another interview that Coleridge exists in kind of the same world as some of your earlier horror work. Did you know that when you started this series, or was that something that sort of surprised you?
No, I knew that. With minor exceptions, every now and then I've done sort of a one-off story. Before
think.
Oh, we're back. Am I
Okay.
back?
Yeah, you're back.
All right. Uh, could be a storm going on. It's really hot here. We've been having some like sounds like dry lightning or whatever in the distance. No, but I was just gonna say that I lost my train of thought. What were we? Okay, what were we doing?
You were talking about knowing that this series was set in kind of the same
Oh,
world
right.
as.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. No, so all my, with the exception of like 3 or 4 stories, everything I've ever written has been set in 1 or 2 parallel universes.
Mhm.
And like I said, you can read any of them in any order. It doesn't matter. It's just that there are threads that tie them together. I said from the start, I knew from the start that Coleridge exists in that universe. It's just that it's not necessary. He wouldn't necessarily bump up against the more I don't know, supernatural or occult elements. I wasn't sure if that would happen. The initial novel was, as I said in that interview, probably was an earnest attempt to write a, a very traditional crime novel and put my spin on it. And the reason I did that is I wanted to increase my readership because a lot of the horror that I've written is literary horror. It's kind of a niche, but I love crime. I've always very frequently melded crime and noir and mystery into my horror. And so I said, let's just trim back some of the more esoteric elements and write a straight crime novel with maybe horrific elements. And so that's how that began. But then obviously things have changed.
You also mentioned, I think the first time you came to the store, let me get the quote right. You had mentioned that you feel like kind of a lot of horror is kind of already grounded in kind of crime and noir already. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, pardon me. Well, oh, um, I guess I wrote an essay about this not too long ago, and essentially I drew a comparison between noir and crime and horror and how they overlap, and that there are distinct differences, but there are also a lot of commonalities. And I would say that for me, horror is something that is a genre in and of itself, but it also is something that periodically I think all genres can do this to some degree, but it's almost like an ingredient. It's sort of a utilitarian thing. Yeah, you can write category horror, Judeo-Christian horror, which a lot of U.S. horror has traditionally been based on. But you can also just inject that into a crime novel. Like I would argue that, or even a Western. I would argue that some of Cormac McCarthy's novels, for example, are borderline horror novels because of the effects that not only just the effects they generate, but also the existential and I want to say metaphysical questions that McCarthy raises, like in Blood Meridian or Child of God. That these are the kind of things, and they're unanswerable. A lot of them, or there's no easy answer. And there's a sort of there's sort of basically a question of the numinous, or these kind of profound, almost occult experiences that you find in horror. And so I look at horror as something that I can inject into almost everything. But that said, a good crime story, or certain types of crime stories, and particularly noir stories, really are not. They're like a stone's throw away from a horror novel and how they operate.
So, like mentioning that, they're kind of each genre has its own kind of tentative rules. You can definitely play with them and kind of push and pull there. So when you're writing, are you kind of aware of those genre rules as you're writing, especially if you're kind of melding genres together?
That's actually kind of that's an interesting question, kind of delicate. I would have to be delicate in how I approach that, or nuance. Well, only because it depends on what I'm writing. If I'm writing short fiction, literary horror, or literary crime, or whatever, those questions are less important to me. Like the rules are very not important to me at all. Right. I digress all the time. But if I'm writing something for a more commercial intent, so in other words, more accessible,
yeah,
then yes, you have to cleave a little closer to the rules. And I have to admit that's something that's very difficult for me because I'm the story is the thing for me. The story and the characters, not necessarily how I'm told to deploy the story or the characters. So it is something, this is something that's been good for me writing this series so far, is to learn how and discipline myself to write a more accessible, reader friendly series. And I have to say, John Langan, my very good friend and super writer, he said something to that effect, that some people look at form as a straitjacket. Oh, I'm stuck writing a sonnet, and I'm going to butcher what he had to say, but hope I've lost your face. I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, but he said, it's not a straitjacket. Prompts and convention are there to be manipulated to whatever effect you can, and sometimes that's where the creativity of a particular author will come in, is how they subvert the tradition or the form. And I have found that I can do that to some degree while still writing a commercial novel, and it's been a very rewarding experience in that regard.
We also find that it's a really interesting way to kind of go on the reader's end too, because it's an easy way to sort of expand people's horizons kind of beyond what they might not necessarily pick up. Like you said, like if they're used to kind of a normal, straightforward crime novel and you've sprinkled in some horror elements, it kind of opens them up to some potential new reading.
Oh, that's a great observation. And it's, it sounds ruthless, but it's not necessarily something, I'll just speak for myself. Yeah. I'm aware of what I'm doing and I make calculations because, writing a novel is a long, arduous process. And I think about what I do. I write in a heat, but I edit with cool, shark-eyed intent. But I will say that this idea of luring readers in, it's fun. In other words, it's you're not trying to trick people. That's one thing that I have no intention of doing, is tricking someone into reading something that they weren't prepared for. It's just that I happen to be maybe offering something that somebody wasn't expecting. And so what I've been trying to do, even as this series is kind of veered into the occult or the supernatural, is that there still is a bedrock, noir, mystery, crime kind of backbone going through there. That this is something that you might have expected to read if you were reading, any of the known and staples of this genre, like Chandler or whomever. Actually, somebody that I've been looking up to a lot is Donald Ray Pollock, who I think takes stuff like Parker would have done or Stark would have done and put some kind of almost metaphysical twist on it. And so that's what I've been trying to do myself.
I had a question from Facebook. Somebody wanted to know what was the name of the essay that you wrote about the topic of noir and horror.
Crime and horror, kissing cousins.
Okay. So if you guys didn't catch that, that was Crime and Horror, Kissing Cousins.
It's in Crime Reads online.
Perfect. So when you started the series, or as you're working on the series, do you have kind of an arc planned out for the character, or is it just sort of kind of unfolding organically for you?
It's a mix. I have a definite plan for the character. This is, this isn't like Spencer, where if I were successful enough to warrant book after book, that I would write book after book. This is a situation where I have a defined story, a definite endpoint, which would probably be anywhere from 9 to 10 books, or 12 books, I should say. Now, what happens to the character along the way, and what leads the character to the final confrontation, is open to change. But I definitely so I still have a lot of surprises for myself. Like, this is taking turns I didn't plan, but the overarching plan is still firmly in place.
Somebody else has asked, speaking of melding genres, do you see the series bringing in, oops, my screen just came, bringing in other genres like Western science fiction or stories about the side characters?
Ooh, I started to reflexively say, well, I don't know about science fiction, but this last book deals with particle accelerators and a little bit about string theory. There's definitely a lot of biology that's referenced. It's definitely not a science heavy book. It's stuff that's going on in the background. Yeah. and because this kind of a meta thing going on here for people who are reading the series and encounter some of the weird things going on in this book. I It was very difficult, but I tried to thread in a rational, so they could proceed from a rational
Yeah.
explanation for everything, and possibly a science fiction or a science fictional explanation. So there's that going on. The stuff about the side characters, I got to tell you, I like to keep side characters, but Lionel has become a force. Lionel Robard, Coleridge's boon companion, has sort of become a force to reckon with, and I could easily imagine writing novellas or even a novel about him.
So you mentioned, kind of leaving in that kind of plausible thing. So do you hear that from readers on kind of both spectrums, where some people think like, yes, this might be some more occult, and other people are like, no, I totally didn't think that at all?
Well, we'll see what happens after this one. I haven't received a lot of feedback from
Yeah,
fans.
because it just came out a couple of days ago.
Right, but I've already getting a little. I think this one's going to be it might be a heavy lift for people not to say, hey, I think there was something really weird going on. but in the previous book, Black Mountain, which really did have a lot of borderline occult elements, but it was still entirely plausible if you wanted to look at it that way. It was, I think most people just took it as, well, we're in Harris territory, or we're in, sometimes Elroy will veer almost into horror. And so I think people kind of, or David Lynch, the filmmaker, or not Lynch, Fincher. I was thinking of Fincher, like some of Fincher's stuff kind of goes this direction. So people were definitely rolling with it. But I have to say, a lot of the critics discussed it, and they compared it to, like they were thinking of Dracula or Bram Stoker and writers like that. And they didn't seem to reject it. I do think that there's going to be plenty of people who wish that I would just, if I'm going to write crime, just be, purists are going to want me just to stick with 100% plausible deniability. But there seemed to be a pretty decent reception to, okay, it's basically crime, and he throws in some, maybe there's some weird stuff in it, but I kind of like that.
Yeah, I find that, and I think we find this a lot in the store, that kind of genre readers are sometimes a little bit more open to kind of when you start to play and you kind of mix stuff. And then which is also funny because, when you think about genre, yeah, they're like we talked about, there are kind of the rules and the conventions, but so much of kind of what puts something in one genre versus the other just a lot of times just comes down to kind of publisher marketing and figuring out like where you're going to put something on a shelf in a bookstore.
I think you're right. And the thing is that going back to how the different genres.
Yep. I lost you again. Yep.
I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, we're definitely having a few interruptions here. No, but these things overlap, and you think about it, everybody loves Angel Heart and Satan's Largest Life, and that Smilla Sense of Snow was a very successful novel, and it was a pretty successful movie too, from what I remember. And it's maybe even gaining more traction now. And that almost has I would say, a quasi of like a borderline Lovecraftian ending with the whole meteorite and some of the implications about that. Because horror isn't always about the devil popping up out of a birthday cake.
Mm-hmm.
Horror can be the implied. And the Smilla Sense of Snow really did. It was actually criticized by a couple of critics because it did divert into, deep geological time. I mean, almost rendering, I think, in their opinion, the struggles that human beings have is almost, well, if we're going to start talking about a meteorite that's been here for maybe hundreds of thousands of years, it's probably going to be here after we're all gone and doing whatever it's doing. How important is this murder mystery then? And there's like a dissonance there. I just look at it and say that's awesome. I'm one of those people, when I ran across that, I wasn't worrying about rules. I was just reading a great thriller novel, and I loved it, and I've taken some cues from that.
Katie wants to know what noir films have influenced your writing the most?
The most. I think the book and the film, and I wouldn't say it has like necessarily influence my style. We can get into a whole conversation about what's done that, but I really am taken by Double Indemnity, the film, and the book. And partially I love it because the film is obviously just a classic film. It's just great acting, a wonderful plot, all that stuff. But the book, the horror, kind of the horrific, and I don't want to get into why it's horrific, but it is a horror novel at the end. And I just find myself going, that's something that I keep coming back to. I'd say that's one of the biggest ones. And I don't know if this qualifies or not, but well, obviously Hitchcock qualifies. You could go through any number of Hitchcock films. The Birds is a film that I would say it's horror, it's noir, it's I don't know, I'm not quite sure what you would say, but that's another one that I find to be influential in that. And once again, John Langan is to blame for this. We were watching it, I believe, with a class, and he was pointing out the supernatural components to it that were sort of presaged the appearance of the birds, like the shape of the mother's, her kind of crazy hairdo that she had. Yeah. He's like, it looks like a bird's nest a little bit, doesn't it? There was all these subtle things in there. So that's another one, but that's I think pretty important to my maturation as a writer.
Yeah.
Ongoing.
Riley Sager, who wrote Final Girls and a bunch of Final Girls, The Last Time I Lied, and he's got a new one, Home Before Dark, coming out soon. Just did a rewatch with Abby Endler from Crime by the Book. They just rewatched Birds and kind of talked about that and how, like, one of the things that's so cool about it is that, like, you really have no idea why anything is happening through the whole movie. There's never that, like, final explanation of, like, this is why the birds are attacking him. That's just one of the things that makes it just so interesting.
It just is. It's something that happened to a group of people. Mm-hmm. And there are themes, and there's symbolism throughout the film, but it kind of leaves you. It sort of leaves you to answer a lot of the questions, which I think sometimes that's a good thing.
Kind of going into that, Greg just asked, which story in your catalog do you think most needs to be adapted to film?
At this point right now, I would love to see the Coleridge novels adapted, just because, and by somebody who would do a psychedelic, turn them into sort of like a psychedelic horror show. I would love that. But if I were to pick a story, like, I could just nominate one story, it would either be the Imago sequence or Hallucigenia, a couple of my early novellas, and probably Hallucigenia would be the one.
I saw this question pop up, and it's kind of one that we've been talking with people about too. How do you think kind of our current situation with COVID right now, how do you think it's going to influence, kind of upcoming fiction? Do you think we're going to see a lot of it? Do you think people are going to kind of veer away from it for a while?
Well, actually, that's a question I've been asking myself about how to portray, as I write, like, say, the next Coleridge novel. It's contemporary. Coleridge is a couple years, in my mind, Coleridge is running a couple years behind us. That's not made explicit in the series. So if I don't want to, I don't have to address Coleridge. If I do another novel right away, I don't have to address it. Yeah. But I write a lot of contemporary short horror and weird fiction, and I'm wondering, should I be addressing this? And I think, for me, I don't know, I haven't really been in heavy conversation with other authors about this. I think it all depends on how long it lasts.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of asking two questions. One is, how will we address this time period in upcoming fiction? Just like, how do we depict characters? Is everybody going to be social distancing when we write stories? Yeah. But there's also, like, are we going to write anything that has it has a plot devoted to it? And I will tell you this: I was thinking about writing a certain type of story recently before this started. Now I'm not. I put it on the shelf because I just think it's going to be. I think some people are going to. That's their stock and trade, is to write about epidemics or pandemics or whatnot. Yeah. You've got your Michael Crichton types who are going to be like Andromeda Strain Part 2. But I think most of us would be well served to just write we may address it in our stories because it may be unavoidable. But I, for one, don't plan to write anything about COVID as a plot device or anything like that. But I am doing some heavy thinking about how am I going to talk about it, and what does Coleridge's life as a private investigator look like if this goes on for a while, and I have to depict that time period. and then what's the world going to look like after it's over? I mean, when we get there, it'll be easy because we'll see, okay, this is what it is. But right now, the situation is so mercurial and and changing so quickly. I find it very hard to predict what I should be doing, frankly.
I don't remember which author it was that we had chatted, but with one of them said she thought that we were, I think it was Jennifer Hillier maybe, she said that she thought that we were going to see a whole lot of novels that were set in 2019 and a whole lot of stuff that was set in 2021, and there just weren't going to be a lot of like, this book is in 2020. You talked about kind of noir, and you've mentioned some of your inspirations too, but can you talk a little bit about some of your kind of inspirations in the mystery world that led you to want to kind of try your hand at a crime thriller?
Oh man, there's so many, and the thing is, and they kind of overlap. Anybody who's read my books, the first two in the series, you really can't call them a mystery or a crime novel. They kind of, or even a noir, they're sort of hybrids. Yeah. But for me, whatever you want to call it, I'm a big John D. McDonald fan. I really enjoyed his Travis McGee novels, but I have to admit, a lot of his standalone novels were what I remember the most growing up. I've studied Travis McGee more just because I want to get pointers on how to do this my way and hopefully correctly. But the Spencer series is another one that I really like. And the people who are putting out stuff right now, I really like Liz Hand's Cass Neary stuff. I mean, it's just, I think the ones that were done, about the girl in the spider web and the girl with the dragon tattoo and stuff are great. Liz Hand is just such an exquisite writer. She can take something that's sort of, I want to say similar to that, but only in the sense that on the surface, it's kind of like really almost like mystery punk or something like that. Like where the hero is just almost an anti-hero, even more so than my character, I would say. And it just puts this really great literary spin on it. Liz Hand, for my money, along with Kelly Link, are two of the great writers that we have working in any genre right now. Stephen Graham Jones, people like that. So Liz Hand's, when she wants to do a mystery, she's going to do a mystery with this inimitable style.
So Austin says he knows that you have a soft spot for video games. So he was curious if you've had a chance to play or at least heard about Death Stranding. It's a game that came out in November.
The only reason I haven't played it is it's not, as far as I know, it's not on PC yet, but it will be played at some point. I've read all about it, and it's my kind of thing.
Yeah. And Jeff asked, what are your thoughts on Thomas Ligotti receiving the Stoker Lifetime Achievement Award, and did you read his acceptance speech?
I have to admit I haven't read the acceptance speech, but if anybody deserves it, Ligotti does. And these things, and I'm speaking as an observer. I don't know how I have to read what he said, how he feels about it. Sometimes Lifetime Achievement awards are almost received as a slap in the face. I'm still alive. I'm still writing. Please. But, Ligotti's output has definitely slowed down over the last 15 years, and he's been around for 30 something years. And so just on the basis of merit, my hat's off to him. In the past, I've been noted I don't agree with his pessimist or antinatalist philosophy, but there's just no arguing that he has done very hard work in the genre and some of the very best work in the genre, and he is highly influential. He influences writers, readers, and critics, and I think that warrants acknowledgement.
Okay, so one more before we go, because we're coming up on time. What are you working on now? Are you working on the next one in the series?
Working on more Coleridge, and I also have, just because I haven't given up writing short fiction the last few years, but my output has dropped down to one story a year or so. This year I'll probably write half a dozen stories because it just invitations that I really don't want to pass up have been piling up, and I want to do that. And also I just feel like that's an important part of my life too, as a writer, but also just as an artist in general. I feel like it's been important to focus on writing the novels and to keep doing it, but I do need to slow down and maybe take a year and make sure that I get back into, not to say back into writing short stories, but basically I have a few in the pipe and I want to get them out.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. For you guys tuning in, we've been talking with Laird Barron and his book, Worse Angels. We are going to be getting some signed book plates to go with them. I just dropped them in the mail to Laird today. So if you guys order a copy at murderbooks.com, just mention that you want a book plate in the comments and we'll get them sent out. We are still closed to customers in the store, but we are available by phone, 713-524-8597, or order at murderbooks.com for email. We're doing curbside pickup, starting to try to figure out what opening up might look like, potentially by appointment at some point, but we are still there doing curbside pickup. So we hope you guys will come check us out. Laird, it was great talking to you. Hopefully we will actually be able to host you in store and be able to do this again next year.
Thank you, John. And thanks to everybody watching.
Take care.